Static beyond the classroom, adopting systems thinking with powerful simplicity. In the program, I think, we went back and forth on this a little bit. Sort of this idea of, okay, well, we teach this in class, and I'm sure there are a number of people in this room who have attended KMP1, Kanban System Design, and some of us have also had some experience teaching it, a lot. And so it's this idea, and I think Dragos touched on it yesterday, actually, a lot of, mapping out his engagement, a lot of it was, okay, what happens after the class? Because the class, in my experience, is more like a static light, especially if it's a public class. When it's people all from the same organization, it tends to enable them to go a little bit deeper with their initial design and the initial conversation. And another beautiful thing about static is that you don't actually tell people what systems thinking is. You don't say, okay, well, now we're going to do this thing called the systems thinking approach to introducing Kanban. But before we do that, I'm going to explain to you all about what systems thinking is. The beauty of static is that you just start doing it. And you start making decisions, and you start making improvements. And so we've got, I've got this clicker here that doesn't want to work so well. I'll stay back a little bit more when I do the clicking. So we have these steps that we go through in static, and I'm not going to address them directly because I think, most of us know what they are. And we know that when we go through this in class, we come out of it with initial design. We come out with real pragmatic guidance, things that we can do tomorrow to improve our organization. And there's the last one that we take away with us. But I was thinking for my talk today, I'd like to actually address the systems thinking part of it. Because I think we can, I've had opportunities to do a little bit more in terms of, beyond the class. Like some of my students in my class, I've had the opportunity to go back and work with them in their own organizations and explore a little more deeply with them some of the challenges that they're having with actually making it stick in their organizations. And I want to start by acknowledging Alexei Zheglov, or Alexei, because, really everything I know about Kanban, Alexei taught me. And most of the ideas that I'm sharing with you in this deck, well, I got from him. Either he's the source or, he knows the source. So if you have a lot of questions about this, and maybe I'm not able to answer them all, and he's probably, him and some of the other guys wearing the white lanyards like Rodrigo, who's sitting over here. But it's this idea that your organization is a complex adaptive system. It's an ecosystem of interdependent services. And it's this idea of complexity, right? Like we know from the Cynefin framework that in the complex domain, our knowledge of reality is emergent. And what does that mean? It means that we don't know what's going to happen until it actually happens. Before that, we can make predictions. We can make guesses. We can make bets, right? And so this complex adaptive system is really what we grapple with as leaders of organizations when we want to change, culture. This is what we need to understand and what we need to take control of. So, with complex adaptive systems, we know that we can't take one part of it and focus on it and say, if we understand this piece and how it works, then we can make strong predictions about how the whole will behave, right? So we don't try to do that in systems thinking. And I have this rather provocative video, but I couldn't find anything better. So the duck doesn't understand that the thing that it thinks is a worm is actually part of it. It's just observing the behavior of the worm, what it thinks is a worm. It doesn't realize that it's actually part of this greater, more complex whole system. And so when we think about teams, we have some of the similar challenges. When we focus on optimizing teams, we can actually cause the sub-optimization of the whole, right? In other words, tampering. Rather than tweaking, right? If we're not careful. So it's a network of interactions. And the interactions or the relationships are not aggregates of the parts. So what does that mean? And you know, this is partly why we don't talk about it in class and we just start doing it, because it is you know, a bit much to wrap your head around. But I like to think of what it isn't, right? So a lot of what we see in terms of these scaled agile methods are really attempts to aggregate the organization of agile teams. You know, aggregate it out to the organization. Put a bigger agile wrapper around it, right? The little agile wrapper works really great around the team of 7 plus minus 2 people. It must be the answer for, you know, 7 plus minus 2 teams. And then 7 and plus minus 2 of whatever that is, right? This is actually called huge less, because less is this part here, right? And huge less is just a bunch of lesses stacked on top of each other. And so, you know, we've got some other fine examples of this out there. I was actually at Ken Schwaber's class when he was teaching this, and in Boston a couple years ago. And I was sitting with someone, she was a certified Scrum trainer with Scrum Alliance. And she was with Realy. So, you know, person in pretty senior position in her organization, fairly accomplished individual as a certified Scrum trainer. That is not easy to accomplish, by the way. Becoming a certified Scrum trainer is very difficult, much more difficult than becoming an accredited Kanban trainer. And so anyhow, she was sitting beside me and she was complaining to me that, you know, this is just Scrum. There's nothing new here. Like, we've all paid thousands of dollars to come here and learn from Ken Schwaber about, you know, scaled professional Scrum and the Nexus framework. It's just Scrum. It's just, you know, take the bubble and make it bigger. And you know, at the end of the first day, Ken wasn't there when that was happening, but, you know, maybe word got to him, the wind carried the message, maybe others were complaining as well. And he wasn't actually teaching most of the class, it was someone else. And Ken comes in and he's over at the side of the room and he's got his own special podium like this. And he said, you're probably thinking that this is just Scrum. And people were like, yeah. And he was like, well, yeah, it is. That's it. It's just Scrum. And and I thought that was great. You know, I was like, wow, this guy's like really confident in his methodology, and maybe he's even seen it work like that in some places. You know, this is the Sutherland version, the other half of the Scrum Guide. And this, you know, there's a lot we could say about this one, but anyhow, we tend to like turtles all the way down, but it's really not how things work. So, because the behavior mutates and self-organizes. You can't aggregate it. It's just going to do its own thing. It's just going to find its own way. That's just how it works. So, when I was at the Scrum gathering in Orlando a couple of years ago, I guess now, Jeff Sutherland was giving a keynote about his thing, scaled Scrum or something. And Scrum at scale with like the at sign with the squiggly circle. And he was saying that, similar to what Ken was saying actually in his class, the secret to scaling Scrum is start with one perfect Scrum team. And then just replicate it until it spreads out to the whole organization. It's a fractal, right? But we know from evolutionary theory that life finds a way, complex adaptive systems find a way, their own way, organizations find their own way. So then what do we do? Because, well, we know we need to change. We need something. So what, like none of these solutions that we can install are the answer? What are we supposed to do? I mean, because the need for change is understandable, right? The need for change, we're not making it up, right? We know we need to change. Why? Well, if our customers are dissatisfied, maybe we think that we should just install Scrum, or we can reorg our people around Scrum teams. But then we realize they're not solving all of our problems. And but because we tend to get caught in these loops, you know, we've found the solution and the solution isn't working, then we just need to get better at applying the solution. We're not doing Scrum right. We're not doing the solution right. Our complex adaptive system isn't taking hold of the simple and obvious solution. Here's another one. We need to improve, let's install Scrum. Scrum fails to install. We must be doing it wrong. Right? And you can keep spinning on that for years. Especially if you have a strong leader who's standing by it, right? Digging his or her heels in and saying, no, this is the way we're going. And maybe you can actually create a new identity around that. I think it's possible. Maybe it's actually been done. Here's another one. Let's do some leadership change, right? How about servant leadership? Well, in my experience, this is what people tend to think servant leadership is, right? And it's fine. Like all of these things are good. But it doesn't necessarily get you out of this reinforcing feedback loop, right? You know, the thinking that got you, the way of thinking that got you into the problem that you're now in, right? So there's a bit of a pattern here, though. There's a bit of a theme here, right? And it was something that Klaus addressed yesterday. Like, your problem starts with your customers, right? In his case study, it was about time to market. And but then they found themselves arguing about who gets to show up at which meetings, who gets to participate in a retrospective. Does this product owner, should the product owner be allowed to attend the team's retrospective? And he's like, what? What does this have to do with time to market to your customers? So we in Kanban and with STATIK, the principle is to focus on customer. And well, the first step in STATIK helps us to do that. But sometimes we need to revisit that conversation, right? Like, because it's a deceptively simple question. Who are your customers and what do they ask you for? I've been in meetings with senior managers, and it can take hours even for the most senior people in an organization to come to some degree of shared understanding about who their customers are and what they ask for. And so the 30 minutes or so that we spent in class wasn't enough. We had to come back to it. And then we had to come back to it again. And then we had to come back to it with some other people in other parts of the organization. So we sense our customers' needs, we respond to our customers' needs, and we fulfill our customers' needs. That's it. That's what we do. That's professional services. However, it is really hard to manage, right? It's really easy for what's in that cloud to just be chaos. It tends to go that way. It tends to have entropy. So we can think, okay, well, maybe we've got some Scrum teams, some Agile teams, maybe even some Kanban teams going on in there. But before we can really do anything, we need to understand, okay, what does a customer really need? Maybe we need to do some research. Maybe we need to, look more closely at some stuff, sketch some things out, get some designers involved, get some creative people involved. And then it needs to go through some kind of approval process because somebody's got to pay for this, right? The money's got to come from somewhere. It's not just going to fall out of the sky into our laps, right? So how much is this going to cost? Well, maybe we need a roadmap to make sure that we stay on track, we stay on budget. And then There's usually some drama because not everybody gets what they want in the roadmap. And then at some point we get to work. Maybe there's some more questions about, okay, well, is it still going to cost what we thought it was going to cost? There's some firefighting. Things get set on fire and you have to go put them out. And maybe HR gets involved at some point. It's my HR. Because they need to feel important. And then, you know, people get a little bit more worried about how much it's going to cost. And then, you know, you've got to take some more risks, make some more bets, roll the dice. And maybe at some point you start measuring something, and then when the measurements aren't telling us what we want them to tell us, there's more drama. Then there's, you know, all kinds of things going on, right? So, it feels like a big problem. It feels like chaos. It feels like a great big mess, right? And so again, it's natural and it's understandable that we want to do something big to change. We want a big change, right? This is waterfall. We want the opposite of that. We want agile. So we try to do big fixes because we have big problems. Let's go agile. Let's do a huge transformation, deep J-curve, expensive, painful, long. People experience change the same way they experience pain. We know that from Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. But when they resist, we think that something must be wrong with them. So we tend to stay caught in this reinforcing feedback loop. This is a little more simple way of framing it up. The resistance actually causes the change failure. So you introduce a big change. People experience the big change as big pain. They resist the big pain, and that causes the big change to fail. Round and round we go. Okay, so what does this have to do with systems thinking? Well, change starts with thinking, doesn't it? We're not going to change anything about our reality until we change the way we think. Right? And then our thought will change our reality. So, when we think, this tends to be how we think. We have a goal in mind, and we come up with some strategy or method for achieving that goal. And in adult education, organizational learning, shown there's lots of good work on this, been done on this a long time ago. We already know that we can identify this as single loop learning, right? We change our strategy or our method of achieving a goal when we're not successful in achieving the goal the first time. Well, we should try something different. We should try a different strategy. But the thinking doesn't really change, right? We're still in that loop, that same loop. Well, let's try Scrum. Well, maybe we should try SAFe this time. Scrum doesn't seem to be enough, right? Change the strategy or the method. But what we don't tend to examine are our underlying beliefs and assumptions, right? And because it's our underlying beliefs and assumptions that generate our goals. Where are these goals coming from? They're coming from our beliefs and assumptions. So maybe we need to actually examine those, right? And when we're able to do that, we're actually able to move the goal and decide on a course of action based on rethinking the initial goal, reevaluating our beliefs and assumptions. Okay? And that's how you get people into systems thinking. At least in my experience. And then systems change, right? Systems change as thinking changes. So we've got this highly complex and difficult to manage, whatever it is, service, system, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so maybe we still have this initial problem with our customers, but we don't have to get caught in the same feedback loop. We can just start by saying we need to do something about it, right? Not necessarily install the first solution that comes our way, or because the other banks are doing it, or because a bunch of managers got into a room and said, oh, this Spotify thing seems cool, let's do that. And that's a true story. I've gone into an organization and I've asked, why are you doing this tribes and guilds and all this stuff? And I was like, how did you make that decision? They're like, well, we got a bunch of managers got in the room for like half an hour, and you know, someone said, hey, there's this Spotify thing, and we all thought, oh yeah, that seems cool. Let's get 300-400 people to do that now. Instead, try something small, safe to fail, safe to roll back, because you don't know what's going to happen until it actually happens. You're in the complex domain. So you're guessing, right? You're hypothesizing. You have to use the scientific method, just like Dragos talked about yesterday. And then you need to see, did we improve as expected or not? If we did, then let's just keep, if we got what we wanted out of it, let's keep doing it. If we didn't, let's stop it. Right? It's hard to do when you're way deep in the bottom of that big J-curve transformation. Usually you just fire the change agent at that point. Start another big J-curve. So here we go, back to static. And we know that, oh, that's not showing up. There's supposed to be this iterative symbol thing. Okay, so there's this question. How can it be used? Like, how can we make it stick? Well, the way that you make it stick is by just doing all of Kanban, right? That's kind of my cheeky answer. You just try to do as much of this as you can, as well as you can. But then, what about the powerful simplicity part? And I just have a little bit of time. So this is kind of like a teaser, and most of you maybe already know about this stuff. It's just things I've learned along the way. What if you think of your service as a shop, or help your client to think of their service as a shop? You're running a shop. Okay? This is you. This is your shop. Put it up on the whiteboard, draw it out for them, let them see it, have a visual. Right? You got some people working with you in this shop. And you've got customers who come into this shop. Who are they? Who comes into your shop? And when they come into your shop, what do they ask you for? Now, I know this seems almost pedantic, But I've done this with senior managers, and they're like, wow, this is really helpful. Like, it really helps focus the conversation. The 2 or 3 hours that it may have taken us otherwise, maybe it only took us 93 minutes. And you got better results. This is totally from Alexi, and maybe there's another source, initial source. But often when you're doing demand analysis with people, again, you need to give them a visual frame, right? Make it easy. Make it super simple. All you have to do is fill in the blanks, right? One type at a time. Thanks to Martin Aziz for these add, change, fix, cleanup work types, and for the clicker. And by the way, if you want, if you want the data that backs this up, go to Martin and Fernando's talk later today. But anyways, people want to know, how do we, what's a good initial WIP limit to have? Well, anything less than infinity is better than infinity, right? So there's one thing. Then, how much stuff are you working on right now? And you know, let's see if we can make it the WIP limit less than that, but it needs to be no more than what everyone is comfortable with, or no less than what everyone is comfortable with, right? WIP limits make people uncomfortable. WIP limits are a stressor that stimulate improvement of the complex adaptive system. But if they're too extreme, they can provoke resistance. And what does resistance do? It causes the change to fail. So then gradually you use Little's law to evolve towards survivability, right? It's just the initial WIP limit. Then you actually have to be able to survive eventually. So how do I frame up system WIP and lead time? Okay, so there's something that happens between the time when you say to your customer is, I promise that I'm going to do this for you. I promise that I will start this. We're going to start. I promise. And you're going to get it. And then, some time goes by, and then you say, here you go, customer. Here's the stuff. Well, that's time, and that's your system lead time. And everything that's in there is WIP. So what is all of that? I got to hurry up a little bit. So again, another Alexi thing, right? Workflow mapping, stages of knowledge discovery, shifts in dominant activity and collaboration patterns, not handoffs. Handoffs are artificial organizational constructs. It's not the work. We focus on the work and how it's flowing. And then we've got customer-recognizable value. So instead of dividing feature number 1 up into X, Y, and Z, X is dependent on Y and Y is dependent on Z, and then we have to put them back together in order to deliver something. Again, nod to Alexi. Well, what if we just framed it up a little differently? And really, X, Y, and Z are stages of knowledge discovery. We flip them around. And feature 1 retains its customer recognizable integrity. So the customer can see it moving through your system. Visibility. And then think about lead time now. Much easier to track it. I think this is the last one. Type class matrix. This actually, a student of mine came up with this, just intuitively. I said, okay, you need to figure out your work types and the classes of service. So she came up, she just went and did this. Threw up this matrix on the wall, on the whiteboard. And I was like, wow, that is brilliant. Right? Just fill it in. Does this class of service apply? If so, what's the criteria? What's the SLA on that? If it doesn't apply, just put an X there. Okay. So this quote makes me feel better about myself sometimes. But, you know, it's also true, right? Like, it's kind of, there's beauty in it, right? Like we're not necessarily, we're not going to change the world overnight. Big fixes aren't real. And that's my talk. Thank you.